In case you missed it, we're going to tell you all about it.
What about, do you know anything about the story of Queen Esther?
Look at me. Esther was like living in a castle. He wanted to get a new queen. And then he chose like a lot of beautiful girls. And they had like a pageant thingy, and they would pick the best girl, and then Esther was it. And then they got married. And then she told Haman. She asked the king to have Haman and the queen and the king all to come for a supper. And then the Queen Esther said that Haman was trying to kill all her people, and then Haman got killed. And they hanged him on the gallows, and Esther became queen.
I think to be a good queen like Esther would be to love the people that you have and not to be going somewhere else always and just not paying attention to the people and to be loyal to them.
To be a good and to know how to treat them good while you're in charge of them.
Take responsibility for what I do, for my actions and what I do.
A lot of work.
Think bravery and risking to save your people.
To be a good queen is to be kind, trust God, and be helpful and brave.
All right, welcome to episode 7 of the ICYMI podcast. This is a podcast that has gone with our current sermon series, In Case You Missed It, the top 10 Bible stories for a life of faith. And we are on number 4 in the countdown. So very exciting.
Goodies.
If this is your first time with us, we're Lake Norman Baptist Church. We're a church that exists to bring healing, connection, and purpose to people all around Lake Norman through the love of Jesus. And we hope that this podcast is a way of doing that for you. And so we're going to just jump right in.
All right.
The number 4 story for a life of faith is
The story of Esther.
Story of Esther.
Yeah. Girl power.
Girl. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So on that, I would love for you to share, Janelle, like how we got to the top 10 to begin with, but there's something unique about these top 4 that you shared with me that I think is interesting.
There is. We have a lot of people that are guessing, and I think it's so fun in our community groups and the different places where I hear people talking about, like, what's next? And they know I'm on staff. They know I probably know, and I'm like, I don't know. You tell me, let's guess around about it.
And also, at first, I did not know we were keeping it a secret and unveiling it as we go. So there were the first couple, I think it was the first week, I was just like openly talking about what the story was, assuming everybody knew. Yeah. And then I got, people were like, why are you telling me? I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. So I've been under lock and key since then.
Tina has been great about holding all of this back and reminding me even, because I'm an open book with it too. But there's been a lot of speculation as to what those top 4 are, and I keep going. I don't know. I'll have to wait and see. We'll see. I don't know. I'll find out when you do. But Esther is one that kind of surprises most people. They think they make the statement, I wonder if Esther's in there. No, that one's not very popular.
I was surprised. It was.
It's a surprising one. And when we put it all together in the March Madness bracket, Esther could have been the number 1 story based on how many number 1 votes it had, but it's children's ministry, and how many 8-year-old girls are not going to say, I love queens and stories of hero females and things like that. So we had a lot of female
voters
for this, and so they really love Esther, and it's a great story. So that's kind of how it landed up towards the top.
I also think my mother-in-law had a little to do with it.
Maybe.
She may have been campaigning for that story in her class.
Among the second grade girls.
Fourth
graders.
But hey, it's cool that it made the list because I don't feel like that's a story we revisit a lot
Yeah.
as adults.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad it made the list. Now Jonah should still be higher than Esther.
I don't know about that. We're going to agree to disagree with that in the love of Jesus.
Well,
So.
one thing you shared with me early on, Janelle, was that like of the top 10 where we landed, the top 4 or maybe 5 were like clear. It was obvious, like this
Very
is 1,
obvious.
2, 3, 4,
Yeah.
and then kind of the remainder. They were also bunched together in
Yeah.
terms of the number of votes
Yeah.
that.
It was hard to kind of decipher which
distinguish
one,
those.
yeah.
But now we're into a place where it was like unquestionably, according to the kids of Lake Norman Baptist,
These are solid choices.
we're there.
Yeah.
Okay. So Esther,
Yeah.
well, I'm excited about it because
Yeah.
I've learned a lot digging into it, and there's plenty like all these that I missed until now. So lots to dig into. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, where would you like to start?
Okay. So in the sermon, I'm mostly sticking within the story and talking about kind of how these different characters develop through the book and what we learn about that. So, as an example, you've got King Xerxes, or the Jewish name Ahasuerus, and the story opens with this scene of just opulence and power and this 6-month banquet for all the military leaders to show off his power. And what you see in it, and at the end of it, you have chapter 1, there's the Vashti thing where he has, hey, my wife, my queen is so beautiful, come on out and just prance in front of everybody, and she's not going to have that. And so,
Because that's weird.
Because that is weird.
well, he and all his, leaders, they get their male pride wounded. And so what they're going to do is they're going to flex their power. And, the end of the chapter is, let's send out an edict that, every man should be the ruler of his household, because that's how we're going to gain respect. And so it's this sort of absurd caricature story of a man that has all this power, desperate for respect. And he's trying to leverage his power, showing it off through these banquets, showing it off through this sort of power move. But he's desperate for respect and clearly, implicitly not getting it. And the reversal, so when you read commentaries that talk about kind of the structure of the story, which is very much similar to so many of the Old Testament stories in its structure, where there's a fulcrum in the middle, there's a pivot point in the middle, and there's a very clear path, almost like a mirror image from scene 1 to where the story opens to where the story pivots to where the story ends. It's like this pattern that we saw it with Noah, we saw it with Joseph, we see it here again, Jonah. It's that chiastic sort of the Bible nerd, which the Bible nerd word is the chiasm.
Yeah, chiasm. I was going to say, I don't feel like we fully dove into it, but chiasm, a lot of times in school you learn about that as like a form of poetry, the way poems are written. But it's interesting how the biblical authors use it in narrative passages where we wouldn't expect.
Over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't look for it because we're not used to that showing up in a just narrative. Like any novel we would read that we would consider a narrative, odds are these days they aren't using chiasms and but it's all throughout the Old Testament, to your point.
Absolutely.
And when you start to see it, it really brings out some new meaning and new emphasis.
And just about every commentary you break open, it will point out so quick chiasm. So the Greek letter chi, C-H-I, looks like what we would call an X. And so it's this X pattern that they're pointing out. And so if you're imagining, the opening scene and the closing scene, they're going to correlate, right? And then scene 2 and the next to the last scene will correlate. And it's like they're narrowing down in this X pattern to the pivot point. And the pivot point is the central message of the story. So like that's how they highlight or bring out, like, this is what we're talking about. With Noah, the central line, God remembered Noah. Everything before that led up to that. Everything after it expanded from that. And that was the center of the chiasm was God keeping his promise to Noah. And then that leads to his promise to all the rest of the world. So over and over and over again, you see this chiasm pattern. It's no different in Esther. And so what you see in Esther in chapter 6 is the center of the chiasm, and it's this reversal of Haman gaining power to losing it, and now Mordecai is gaining power. And so what it highlights is how the story opens with King Xerxes and flexing all of his power. the story ends in chapter 10 with Esther and Mordecai being the ones who have gained power and influence in a good way. And so the reversal that we'll talk, that we talk about in the sermon is, kind of the world's way is to use power to gain respect. And in so many ways, this is just the way the world works. And it's what we sometimes instinctively fall prey to, is trying to leverage whatever power we can gain in this desperate quest for respect, this desperate quest for honor. And in that way, we're like King Xerxes, who is sort of the foil in this story. Like, he's kind of an absurd figure. Yeah. Because everything he does, even the good stuff, is just because, it's suggested to him. Yeah, he's like, okay, I'll do that. So he's kind of,
people pleasing.
Yeah. And so it opens with that, but it closes with this reversal of power. And you see it in the reversal of living a life of faith versus living a life of sort of self-promotion. And so while, Xerxes and then Haman tries to leverage power to gain respect, you see Mordecai and Esther showing respect and then subsequently gaining power. So the reward, and even where that respect is unwarranted, right? So you've got Xerxes, who loves to throw banquets, like banquet after banquet after banquet. This is one of the themes, right? And so how does Esther approach him when she has this request on behalf of her people? Well, she throws him a banquet. Like, she's speaking his love language. Yeah. You know what I mean? So she's honoring the way that sort of Xerxes operates, and very savvy, very wise, but in a clear way, she's respecting his authority, but also his way of thinking and behaving. She's playing his game. And subsequently, God uses it. Of course, one of the things that most of us didn't miss, some of us may have, but God's not mentioned in the story at all. So, Song of Solomon, Esther, books that don't mention God at all, but the fingerprint of God is unmistakable all the way through it. So the sermon kind of lives in that space. We don't talk about the chiasm, so that's a good podcast topic. But the thing that I missed in this that I think would be fun to talk about is just the parallels with other what scholars would call post-exilic literature. So like in the history of Israel, you've got Babylon, who comes along in 605 BC and conquers Israel, and there's this exile where they take the Jews out of their homeland and they're in Babylon, and that's the story of Daniel. So Daniel and his friends, they're among that deportation from Israel into the exile in Babylon. And so Daniel is the first story that happened like in the exile. And that relocated the Jews into Babylon, who were subsequently conquered by the Medes and Persians. Esther is in the Persian era. And so it's just interesting. So it's about 100 years after Daniel. And there's a lot of parallels in sort of what we read from Daniel. Daniel was exceptional. He gained favor with everybody that he was put in their charge. Same thing with Esther. Like when you're introduced to Esther in chapter 2, like she's talked about as beautiful, but there's this winsomeness that's implied that she just finds favor with everybody. Very similar to what you see from Daniel. Very similar to what you see in Joseph. So there's some of these patterns.
That's where my mind went, is thinking about the parallels between Esther and Joseph.
Yeah. And then, actually, same Daniel and Joseph, they find their place in like the court of the king, right? And just increasing levels of authority, but always with integrity. And so you see that. One of the things, and I do talk about this in the sermon because I think it's so helpful for us just people. So God is all over the Daniel story, right? So the book of Daniel is loaded with overt, talking about God did this, and Daniel over and over again. Esther, not at all. Right. One of the things about the exile, so from the time Daniel and his friends went in 605 BC, the prophecy was, I believe it was from Jeremiah, that it would be about 70 years long. And so around 538 BC or so, close to 70 years later, before Esther comes along, King Cyrus, a Persian king, allows the Jews to go back. And so the formal exile had ended. A bunch of the Jews went back to Jerusalem. but then some of them stayed. That's an interesting dynamic. And there's lots of Jewish literature, which I also have never really, dug into quite so much, but in the book of Esther, lots and lots of Jewish literature. And they talk about, okay, perhaps those who chose to go back were like the ones who crassly cared the most. And the ones who stuck around in Persia were like, not so bad here in Persia. I think I'm going to choose to stay here. And so to just way oversimplify and just sort of project some speculation onto it, you wonder if, and some commentators wonder aloud, are the ones who went back to Jerusalem kind of the more spiritual ones? The more spiritually minded Jews who kind of embraced their national religion more? And the ones who stuck around in Persia were kind of the more secular minded, And in a way of saying, kind of the more ordinary people. Yeah. And so one of the things that I think is interesting, can't really press it too far, but I'm thinking right now of Daniel as like kind of a well-trained spiritual leader type of Israelite. Esther and Mordecai and those who chose not to go back or were still in Persia for whatever reason, kind of just your regular rank and file Jew. Like regular people like us, like these weren't the scholars, these weren't the heroes. This is like just regular old Jewish people. Esther was an orphan. Her parents had died. She's being raised by her uncle in the capital city of Persia, just living life as a Jew. One of the things in that I think that's pretty cool is like how God uses regular people. And so, yes, she becomes a queen, but there's not one sort of royal thing about that. It's kind of, it's clearly a beauty contest and sort of a name, a title that, doesn't seem to carry much weight unless you can convince the king to do something. So anyway, that's a lot of just me rambling on about stuff, but just connections with Daniel, connections with, this period of time and where they would have lived kind of in the context around Esther. I don't know, I think it adds a lot of color to what we see in the story, and actually relatability to who Esther was and who Mordecai was. Like, these weren't the spiritual giants. Like, they're just doing the next right thing, I
think that's one of the reasons that girls, kind of gravitate towards this, because she's an ordinary human. Like, she's not anything special other than this beautiful woman that God kind of had his hand on and placed in a position of having influence for his people. But there's that beautiful saying, such a time as this. And I think that's one of the things that, to me, was a draw to that, because it personalizes it to me. Like, what is my purpose in this? And as parents, helping our kids see, like, what is your purpose that God has for you this week? It doesn't have to be something big and flashy that you're going to have a crown for. But how God can use you in this moment, for this moment, right now. So
and that's
no question.
So for such a time as this, I feel like that's where most people go when they think about the story of Esther. It's on pictures from
quotable,
lobby and whatnot. But when you think about the other stories that there's parallels to, right? Like, Daniel was put in that situation for a specific purpose. Joseph, same thing, right? Like, God knew the famine was going to come, and Joseph had to go through all that so that God could work through him to bring a blessing to not only his people, but to the nations. And with Esther, it's the same thing played out again. And I think that the interesting thing about God being all over the story of Joseph, the story of Daniel, and then God not being mentioned at all in Esther is, in both situations, it's still God is at work.
Right.
And he's still preparing you for his purposes, even if you don't see it. Or even if it's not in your face. You may not see it till after the fact. Like, I'd be curious to know if Esther knew the extent of what God was doing in the moment, or if she reflects back on it.
I feel like we can never really see that big picture and imagine our talents. I think that would be, we would probably be a little narcissistic if we tried to do that. But knowing that God has a plan and a purpose, and that it's going to be accomplished, whether we want to be willing or not. But her quiet obedience and her quiet faith of carrying out the thing that he had for her is such an example for us as well. Like, it doesn't have to be in your face. The way that we live our faith, it doesn't have to be aggressive or anything like that. It's a quiet faith that she was doing the next right thing, and that was bringing about God's will. And I think that was evident in her heart as she did it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You guys know I'm a huge Ted Lasso fan, right?
I am a new Ted Lasso fan. I love it.
Yeah, you started watching it.
I did.
Yeah.
It's a great show.
There's a scene where he's in the locker room and he's talking to the team, and he's talking about what defines them, and he says it's our choices, gentlemen, that define us.
Yeah.
And each little moment, it's the actions we choose to take, the choices that we make based on. We can choose to make decisions based on our own wisdom or on God's wisdom. And I think in the 3 stories we talked about that parallel together, the common thread is they're choosing to make their decisions based on the wisdom of God and not on their own wisdom. And that's what defines who they are. And that's why we look up to them.
Yeah.
Not that they were, they had their own flaws.
Yeah.
But their choices were more influenced by the spirit of the living God than by their pride and their, like you see from King Xerxes. And I've just always loved that quote from Ted Lasso. It really gets you thinking about like the choices I make in the ordinary moments of life. What does that say about who I am as a person?
Yeah.
Faithful in the big things, faithful in the little things.
Yeah, I worked at a summer camp, and that was something they preached, and it stuck with me, is that little things are big things. So, if we walk around our church campus and see a piece of trash, picking that up, like, doesn't seem, it'd be easy to leave it there for someone else to pick up. But that little things turn into big things. And those choices you make in those moments affect the bigger decisions you have to make later on down the road and how you deal with those. So, I think that's just something that hit me just now about that story as you were talking, that I think is a powerful application point.
Yeah. I think it makes it more relatable to us, because one of the things, too, a difference between Daniel and Esther is there were lots of miraculous acts in Daniel.
Yep.
Surviving the lion's den, surviving the fiery furnace, unmistakable God intervening miraculously in history. In Esther, it's not overt miracles. Clearly God is at work, orchestrating these opportunities for Mordecai and Esther. I mean, like the very beginning one with Mordecai, the fact that he's hanging around to try and keep an eye on Esther, he overhears this assassination plot, and he takes that opportunity to do a good thing. It's clearly presented to him, and as you read the story, the implication is, that God is at work behind the scenes. But it's not like an aberration of the way that the natural world works. And so these are all like interpersonal categories, which is life, and how we take advantage of those to either try to gain power and earn respect or show respect to others and rightfully use the power that may come along with that. I just think it makes it very relatable to us, which I think is a really cool feature of that. Yeah. And another connection, so you got Daniel, who was about 100 years before Esther. So the story of Esther, historians think it's around like in the 480s BC, 486, 45, but just through biblical and then extra biblical literature that, accounts all the Persian kings, whatnot. So like this particular king, Xerxes #1, in history from the Bible and other sources, we know when he reigned, right? So it kind of.
Did you find out if he's the same King Xerxes from the story of the 300 Spartans going up against the Persians?
I did not. That's something that our podcast audience can look up.
Yeah, let us know if you know if it's the same king. Yeah.
But then Nehemiah. So another great Bible character, where he comes along and rebuilds the wall of Jerusalem. Well, he comes along, maybe 40 years after Esther. So here's Esther situated in between Daniel and then Ezra and Nehemiah, who come along later. I totally missed this, but you can go back to the beginning of Nehemiah, and it's right there. You first meet Nehemiah. He's the cupbearer to the king, Persian king, in the capital city of Susa. Same town.
Wow.
that Esther's, all the events of Esther take place in Susa, S-U-S-A, which is the capital city of like the Persian Empire, which is enormous at the time. I show a map in the sermon of like, it's basically from like India to Greece. It's enormous, the scope of this empire at this time. And so, Esther and Nehemiah lived in the same town, maybe 40, 50 years apart.
That's wild.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So just historically how these things kind of situate together. And I mentioned the post-exilic, so like Nehemiah, Esther, those would be after the exile. Things that happened in and around Persia, with the Jews who were still there. And interestingly, here's Nehemiah, still in Persia. He's a Jew. So there's something there too about how God didn't just have his people removed from Jerusalem in the exile only to have them go back, but also to disperse them around the world for his kingdom to expand and to grow and to use lots of people for such a time as this, in the different places and times that they were put there. So Nehemiah's another, Old Testament hero. We'll get to him at some point too. But
Very cool.
Yeah, that's been a theme that's popped up as we've gone through this series, is just how clear it is from the beginning God's heart for the nations. He's choosing to work through one people, one family.
Yeah.
But it was always
About
to be a blessing to the nations. And so, even the early church, when they get dispersed because of persecution, it was so that the gospel would go forth.
Yeah.
Not, which it kind of relates to the human experience too, right? Where oftentimes the Israelites or the early church, they would go through something really difficult, but then this amazing thing would come out of it, and they would grow tremendously, or God would do some amazing thing. And for us, I was just having a conversation with a guy today, and we were talking about how it'd be nice if we could grow just with things being easy, and you could learn lessons with it just being like,
that's all we want.
Yeah, but just the reality of the human experience is we don't grow unless we experience pain and hardship and difficulty and suffering.
And if everything were easy, we wouldn't feel like we need the Lord. And, so I think gravitating back to that and some of the experiences that we've all had, the hard things in life drive us back to the cross and back to the grace and the love of Jesus. And, that's never going to change. It's from the beginning of time.
Yeah.
Everybody is desiring that relationship with him and the healing that only he can bring. So,
Yeah. It's hard. It requires pain, and it's also messy. Which, if I could offer one more thing, I guess that I had missed in this, but what Esther is called to do in particular, there's a lot of gray area in that. So like, she gets pulled into this beauty contest that she probably didn't sign up for, and so basically what she had to do was go in and sleep with the king. Like the text is very modest in the way that it plays it out, but you get into a lot of the old Jewish sort of rabbinic literature, and they talk about like what that's code for, So she's having to navigate all kinds of morally challenging areas that there's just not easy answers for any of that kind of stuff. Similar, so like I talk about like Haman being kind of the foil for Mordecai, like kind of Haman's faults highlighted Mordecai's virtue. Same with Vashti, who was the previous queen, and Esther. And why didn't Vashti obey Xerxes when he invited her and his drunken party to come and parade in front of everybody? Because he was asking her to do more than just walk around, in her robes. So there's a lot of morally, not even questionable, morally.
The Bible isn't always PG.
It was a messy world that Esther got pulled into to navigate, doing what was right. And it's kind of like so many of these. I mean, heavens, God bless the women in the Bible who get honored. I mean, you got Rahab the prostitute. We talked about, way back in the Joseph several weeks ago, Tamar, and there's just even
both
today.
appear in the lineage of Jesus.
Both appear in the lineage of Jesus, but all of which you'd point to and say, hey, a good Baptist wouldn't be doing those things, and yet, they were called to sort of engage in the world on the world's terms, and yet God used all of it. And so I think there's something in that for us too, not to have no principles or scruples, but just is messy. So not only is it hard and painful, it's also can be confusing and messy, the things that we're called into, and that's not foreign to the Bible. Yeah. Right? So we have a God who's given us his word that has examples of people doing things that, when you slow down and appreciate what's there, you're like, well, it's not easy.
We definitely miss that stuff in children's ministry.
And we'll continue.
Rightly so.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. And, I think that's a great way to wrap up things. Life is messy, life is difficult, but when we immerse ourselves in the Word of God as he's revealing himself to us, his word says that we're jars of clay, and that he has stored his treasure in jars of clay. And so despite our faults, despite our mess, God is at work. His light is shining through in the darkness. That's what we want to be as a church, to not, back away from our weaknesses and our shortcomings, but to allow God's light to shine through it for whatever time God has appointed for us. And so I want to thank you both for being on the podcast today. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed, and we hope you have a great week.